For my own part, I thought once again this is one of those occasions we could recite the issue of free speech in Germany. We could try to remind Chancellor Merkel about the tradition of Mill and Milton and more, or we could just get on and do it. So I inaugurated the first offensive type Recep Erdogan poetry competition, where everybody had to write a poem about Mr. Erdogan. I led the way with a poem which I was surprised my editor published, but the point of it was that you had to be extremely offensive about him. It wasn't allowed just to be rude or snarky or something. It had to be gratuitous. No non-gratuitous poems would make it. It had to be defamatory as well. Non-defamatory poems, I decided. Couldn't do anything with them. Anyhow, I did my opening number and invited my readers to send in their poems, also being as rude as possible and defamatory and vile about Mr. Erdogan. And very swiftly, a reader, a kindly reader, offered £1,000 cash prize. So my readers started to send in poems in even larger numbers. I liked to think that they were propelled by a deep belief in free speech, but it's possible they just wanted the cash. Anyhow, the number of poems increased. We got some very fine entries. And at one point, my editor called up and said, well, the former mayor of London, Boris Johnson, has entered the competition. I thought, well... This, I must say, by the way, I owe him a slight apology. He was in an interview with a friend who writes for a Swiss paper who said, have you heard what Douglas is doing at The Spectator? And Boris said, yeah, absolutely, what terrific stuff, and so on. And this friend said, well, why don't we make up a limerick right here and now? And Boris said, yes, why don't we? Being that sort of chap. And anyhow, rather unfairly, as I say, he... not knowing he'd entered, but it was on record, entered. And I thought it would be best if we agreed that he had won. He took the news, I have to say, quite well. He offered to give the money to charity. He was in the middle of the Brexit campaign at that point, and it was rather difficult for him because the other side in the Brexit campaign, the Remain side, were largely at that point campaigning on the idea that Boris Johnson was this sort of idiot who just sort of said things left, right and centre that he ended up having to apologise for. So I didn't help with that bit of the narrative. But anyway, he took it very well. There was great silence from his political opponents, actually, who realised they were about to fall into a trap of saying you mustn't be rude about the Turkish Sultan. Anyhow, Boris Johnson, of course, subsequently, after Brexit, was made our Foreign Secretary. So I did tell readers that, in actual fact, I'd just pretended that the prize was £1,000. It was actually the position of Foreign Secretary of the United Kingdom. Anyhow, Boris, of course, went to see President Erdogan the other day and shook his naughty hand, and that was a great pleasure. Anyhow, it was principally a pleasure, of course, to rub it in the face of Chancellor Merkel. Because what could be more ridiculous than prosecuting a comic in Germany for a poem, only doing that whilst your nearby ally has a foreign secretary willing to do the same thing. Now, in Britain, we don't send our foreign secretary to prison for insulting Mr. Erdogan. We make him foreign secretary. But I think it would be unsustainable that Jan Böhmermann can actually be prosecuted or go to prison for a maximum, I think it was, of 4 years in Germany for that alleged crime. Anyway, this is my view generally on free speech. The answer is not to have endless seminars about it, it's just to do it and encourage everyone else to do it and do it more and more and break all the rules and laws if they're there, because who do we want to tell us what we can say or think or do? Who would you appoint to be such a person? As I pointed out, the person I would rely on last to tell me what kind of joke I would be allowed to tell would be a German judge. They are enemies of the government, and they have a completely legitimate asylum claim in Europe. But if you add up all of these countries, from Bangladesh and Pakistan and Afghanistan and Iran and Iraq and Syria, and across the Middle East, and you go all across North Africa and down into sub-Saharan Africa, you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of millions of people who have absolutely legitimate asylum claims to come to Europe. And this is a discussion which I very rarely hear. I very rarely hear any politician willing to get into the long grass on this and talk about it realistically. And here is then the second problem of that. If the politicians don't allow the speech, then you get bad speech. Then the speech goes wrong. Let me give you a couple of examples. In recent months, I've noticed an upsurge on social media and across some protest groups in Europe of talking about refugees in the most appalling terms. You can see protest movements that describe all migrants to Europe as, for instance, rape-fugees, or some that will call them, for instance, refugee-jihadists, an unamusing term, a dumb term as well as being an offensive one. But that's what you end up getting. Chancellor Merkel pretends that all of the people coming are legitimate, all of the people are good, none of them will ever do anything bad, Europe is their new home. And then the response, sure as anything, is that you get people who say that all of these people, including many people who fled from rape and jihad, are themselves rapists and jihadists. It's the same thing you can see being played out in the States. You get a president who is so unwilling to say the word Islam or Islamist or Islamism or Islamic terrorism and so on, that he, even when an American hostage is decapitated by a guy shouting Allahu Akbar in the Syrian desert, says that that attack probably had less to do with Islam than with any other religion. It's inevitable when you have a US president who says that somewhere down the road you're going to get a counterpart who says, for instance, not one Muslim should come into the States. It's yin and yang, as obvious as night follows day, that that's what happens. Because the generation of politicians who've been in charge tried to stop the debate, tried to stop the discussion, and so the discussion is turning rancid across Europe. This seems to me to be the clearest possible threat to our societies in Europe, and one which we are unbelievably loath to admit to. You know, Mencken, I said I'd give you another quote. H.L. Mencken once also said, "The most dangerous man to any government is the man who's able to think things out for himself and without regard to the prevailing superstitions and taboos." But we have so many prevailing superstitions and taboos in our societies, and our politicians found them so incredibly helpful for years, that I genuinely see for the first time, I think, in my adult life, how bad this could go in Europe. For the last week, we've gone to Paris, to Berlin, and now to Stockholm. When somebody said to me the other day in Stockholm that they thought that Sweden was the craziest country in the world, apart perhaps from North Korea, I can assure you that having been to North Korea, you're on a very level pegging. There are so many things that one can see going wrong because, as I say, the speech has gone wrong, because the ideas have gone wrong, and we never thought them out. We never had the courage to go through with them, and people tried to shut us up and silence us. Well, if there's any point to a day like today, it is to say no to that, to say we will insist, we will disagree among ourselves, we will disagree with each other, and there will be much debate and discussion in the years ahead and things on which we will all disagree. But that on one thing in particular we have to be firm, which is that there should be nobody, no German judge, no German chancellor, no Swedish politician, no Brussels bureaucrat or British politician who should stop us from saying what we think about our own future. And that we have that right, we will retain that right, and we'll retain it whatever happens in the years ahead. Thank you.
In Sweden we hear a lot about these people from the press, the so-called academics. When they talk about free speech, they very, very often mix in the word "but."
Oh, yes.
What do you think about these people?
The Butt Brigade. Yeah. Yes. I do love that. But whenever anyone does it, I have a rule that I only start listening after the butt. Everything they've said before the butt's useless. Generally, it's some form of free speech. I believe in free speech for me, but not for thee. That's really what it is. I am good, you are bad. I am well-intentioned, you are bad-intentioned. So why would you allow somebody who had such terrible views you disagreed with to speak? That's all those people are doing. It's all they're doing on campus. It's all they're doing in the press.
But where do you see the hope? Where do you see the seeds of hope?
The dead cats being thrown on the highway.
Sanctuaries.
Sanctuary.
It's a very good question. Look, I mean, to be quite frank, I mean, no one's ever mistaken me for Prozac. I don't think there's much hope. I really don't. I don't think there's much hope. We've screwed this up royally, in my view. And there's no point in sugarcoating that or giving people false optimism and so on. I think there are tiny points of light, of which, may I say, you're one, of which a small number of others I would include, who are people who have thought their own way out of this, from all sorts of backgrounds, all sorts of directions. We had one with us this week from Canada, Rahil Raza. I can think of Majid Nawaz in my country, and others who, in the ones, but significant ones, are breaking the taboos, are breaking the paradigms, are breaking the expectations of the elite. I think, by the way, that my own view on this is that those of us who deal in ideas and books and articles and speeches and so on overestimate in the short term the power of ideas. We like to think that in a discussion, you think this, I think that, I will explain this to you, and you'll go, No. Now, all of you who are married know that disagreements don't often end that way, and often end very differently. I think the best you can do is to make sure the thinking is right when the events change. And we are seeing events at a very rapid pace in Europe now. And as the events keep happening for ill, I'm afraid, the best we can hope for is that as they happen, the ideas will be in place to give people a better landing. My own view is that because of what Merkel and what others have done, we've got very little hope of a soft landing in Europe. But we, collectively, people in this room, people like you, the speakers here today, can help make that landing a bit softer and can ensure that when terrible things continue to happen, they do not take us all down. And in the meantime, tell Chancellor Merkel and the rest of them that they may well be suicidal, but they can't commit suicide for the rest of us. It's not a third-party process.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.